So right now I want to take a little bit of time and talk about plant sexual reproduction. We call this alternation of generation because there are two generations: the sporophyte generation that produces the spore through meiosis, and the gametophyte generation that produces gametes, egg and sperm, through mitosis. I want to just talk about that process. There are some similarities with human sexual reproduction, and there's some major differences. So I just want to show you some examples. A weed that grows in my lawn that I really dislike. You can see that it almost looks like clover, but it's not. And this vegetative tissue is the sporophyte generation, so it's diploid, 2N. Another example would be these plants over here, coneflowers. The leaves, the stems, the roots, all of that is the sporophyte generation. All those cells are diploid, 2N. This tree is the sporophyte generation. And all the plants, the conifers and the flowering plants that you can see on my yard, all of those tissues is sporophyte, the sporophyte generation, and their job is to produce spores. What's more complicated is the gametophyte generation, and I want to here is actually a beautiful little flower we can look at that isn't, we're in September, so fall period. Most of these leaves are now at a point that they're starting to wilt and die. But what happens in this sporophyte plant, this coneflower plant, all of the cells are diploid, except early in the development of the flower, usually in the springtime, as the flower buds just starting to come out. Deep inside the flower, there are the female flowering parts, and at the base of the female flowering parts is an ovary, just like we have in humans. And inside that ovary is a cell called a Microsporocyte that's diploid. And that cell is going to go through meiosis to produce a haploid spore that's called a megaspore that's haploid. And that megaspore is then going to divide through mitosis to produce an 8-celled structure inside what's called an ovule, inside of the ovary at the base of the female flower part. And that ovule, after the egg is fertilized and develops, is going to become a seed. And the ovary wall that houses the ovules is going to swell up and become fruit. So you're much more familiar with this from the perspective of eating fruit. If you take something like a papaya and you cut it open, inside you're going to find hundreds of seeds inside of that fleshy, juicy fruit. And each of those seeds originally started in the base of a female flower as an ovule that then got fertilized, and that fertilized egg then became a zygote, then through mitosis became an embryo inside of the seed, and then when the seed landed in the right place and it germinated, that embryo resumes growth and becomes a seedling that grows into a new sporophyte plant. And so that's what's going on with the female part of alternation of generation. Again, inside the base of the female flower parts, right as the flowers are produced and coming out of the bud, you have these Microsporocyte cells that are still diploid like the rest of the plant, but they go through meiosis to produce a haploid megaspore that is haploid and divides mitotically, and one of those cells that gets divided mitotically becomes an egg that will get fertilized by a sperm. Okay, so that's the female flower part, and then there's the male flower parts, which we call the stamen. And it has a filament which holds up this structure at the top that houses the pollen. And the same thing happens in the pollen. Early on in the development of the flower, the male flower part, all of the cells are diploid, like the rest of the sporophyte plant. And then inside of that stamen, there's a cell called a microsporocyte that's diploid that goes through meiosis and becomes haploid. It becomes a microspore. A single-celled haploid microspore. And then that divides mitotically 3 or 4 times to produce this multicellular microgametophyte that we also call pollen. And in those mitotic divisions, those haploid cells, 2 sperm cells are produced. And then the wind or pollinator will carry that pollen from a male flower part where the pollen's produced to a female flower part where the pollen will land on the stigma, which is the top part of that female flower part. And then the pollen will germinate and grow a pollen tube all the way down through the neck of the female flower part, down into the ovary where those ovules are located. And inside those ovules are the megagametophyte, the gametophyte generation of where the eggs are housed. And that pollen tube, once it finds the ovule and the egg, then those sperm cells are transported down, and one of those sperm cells will fertilize the egg. Haploid sperm, haploid egg come together. N plus N is 2N, it's diploid. That becomes a zygote cell that then over time will divide through mitosis to produce an embryo inside the ovule. It becomes a seed, and then that embryo, once germination conditions are right, like with your seed, it will resume growth, divide more cells mitotically, and produce a little seedling that will grow into a new sporophyte plant. And this happens, I've explained it in terms of flowers, but it also happens in conifers or gymnosperms in cones. So here's a female cone right here. And actually here's some really more mature ones, here's some juvenile ones. And if you look right here, you can see these are female cones that are very, very young. And inside these female cones, the same thing is happening. Microsporocyte, a 2N cell, is being produced. It's going through meiosis to produce a megaspore that then divides mitotically to produce a megagametophyte that through mitosis will produce an egg. And then you have other, let me see if I can find one. Oh, there's one. I'm just gonna pull it down. You have male cones that are much, much smaller than the female cones. And inside these male cones, pollen's produced. If these were releasing pollen right now, I could flick it and there would just be an explosion of pollen that would be released. Yellow pollen that would just kind of go everywhere. It's already been released this year, but the same thing happens inside this male cone. There's a micro or male sporocyte cell that's diploid that goes through meiosis and produces a microspore, a haploid single cell that then divides through mitosis to produce pollen, a pollen grain. And then within that pollen grain, mitosis produces 2 sperm cells that goes and then lands in the female cone and transfers that pollen transfers the sperm cells into the female portion of the cone, where the sperm will fertilize the egg, and then a seed will form inside the female cone. And then these are already have seeds inside of them. And probably early next year, these are gonna open up. Like this is already opened up. And there are little seeds that are produced on these cone bracts, and the wind will blow them away and they'll flutter like the maple fruits, right? Are like helicopters, and the wind will blow them away to a place where that embryo, under the right conditions, right, warm enough temperatures with water, will begin to germinate, and a new little pine seedling will come up and a new pine tree will be produced. So this is sexual reproduction, alternation of generation. The sporophyte generation is diploid. The gametophyte generation is haploid. The gametophyte generation produces egg and sperm. Sporophyte generation produces spores through meiosis.